Yo, welcome into another episode of Till Mets Do Us Part here, courtesy of the Chop Sports Network. You can get this podcast wherever it is you listen to your podcast. Doesn't matter to us, whether it's Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, all of those places and more. It just matters that you listen. And speaking of listening, you can now watch us if you prefer to take in the podcast that way over on our YouTube channel, which is appropriately called Till Mets Do Us Part. So doesn't matter. Listen, watch, little bit of both. Just enjoy the podcast. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez. We were off last week, Ibby. It was my fault, but we are.
It always is,
now.
John. Always your fault.
Listen, man, we could have did it, but I was in London for fans who follow me on social media. I was in London, so we would have had to record this at 4 o'clock in the morning, my time, something weird to make it work. And it just didn't seem worth it because for the first time in a very long time, I actually couldn't watch our Mets. I mean, I watched a couple minutes of games here and there, but the time difference is so dramatic. And I know there's a couple of really great UK-based Mets fans on Mets Twitter. And honestly, man, hats off to them officially now and forever. Yeah. I don't know how they do it because, like I said, out here on the West Coast, I like that the games start at 4 o'clock. Yeah. I can still go out and get dinner after the game's over at 7:30. It's super easy. These games are on at 4 o'clock in the morning, man. I can't do it. It's ridiculous.
God bless them. I have no idea how they do it. But, John, I was following you along on social media, and I'm thinking, this guy's he's taking in everything over there. He's across the pond. I'm like, I'm going to have to teach this guy baseball by the time he gets back because he's going to forget all about it. But I'm happy that you are finally back. I'm happy that we're hitting record. And I'm even happier that we finally got a guest that's been on my list of someone that I wanted to get on the show. I love his stuff when it comes to the Locked On Podcast Network and Locked On Mets. So I'm going to throw it back to you. You can intro him, and we can get rolling with today's episode.
Listen, man, you basically just introed him, and I am so happy that this guy is not only on the show, but put up with the fact that we're recording this a day earlier, but somehow 3 hours later than normal. Right. And it's because of my schedule. So like you said, from the Mets Locked On podcast, it is the one and only Ryan Finkelstein. Ryan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, for sure, guys. It's no worries at all about the timing change. You got it in before the Mets game tonight, so plenty of time to talk about this team.
And let's start right there. Look, obviously you guys got a great podcast, and so I'm sure people that are listening to us listen to your podcast. But for the people who haven't, for the people who have never heard you before, look, the Mets are rolling. They got the best record in the NL, but there's still some weird feelings. There's still some detractors. If you get out there on Mets Twitter, you get into the weeds. Ibby and I have some very strong opinions on it. So before we talk about specifics, just your overall perception of this team. Here we are, as we are getting really, we're approaching the halfway mark at this point.
I understand the pessimism. I think any of us as Mets fans can get that feeling. It's years of scars, right? And last year, obviously, the Mets were a first-place team in the first half, and they collapsed. But this Mets team is so much different than that Mets team. I've tried to put it in context on my show a lot. We're talking about a whole different level of dominance. Last year, the Mets did own first place for 90 days, but their largest division lead was 5.5 games. They were just basically the first place team by default. Nobody else really got into the mix. And yes, there was a ton of panic when the Braves won 14 games in a row. But I tried to caution people, if you watch the actual team that you're supposed to support, the Mets never gave us any reason to doubt them. And they haven't all year. They've been winning series after series after series after series. What more do you want from them? And the crazy thing that I think gets all of us excited is they still haven't even gotten to the thing we all wanted coming into the year. It was, when are we going to see Jacob Degrom and Max Scherzer in the same rotation? And we're getting closer and closer to that possibility. And man, this team's going to get really scary.
And that's the thing for me. Look, I know you and I always talk about this because we try to be level-headed and yes, a little bit skewed towards maybe one tick towards optimism, because if you're not going to be optimistic about sports, why even watch? Why sit down and watch this, especially since Cohen has taken over? Obviously, there's a lot more to be positive about. But when you look at this team, they have not yet gotten Max and Jake in the same rotation, like Ryan said. And they also haven't gone on a run. They've just been consistently consistent. I think they've only lost 2 series. They've only split 2 series. Everything else has been a series win. I mean, as somebody said to me on Twitter yesterday, they said, well, if the Braves and Phillies go on a run. And I'm like, if they go on a run, the Braves and Phillies just won 14 games and 9 games respectively and didn't even come close to catching the Mets.
Right.
What about the run the Mets can go on? The Mets haven't been on some kind of streak like that.
Right.
So, I mean, this is a good team. Can we just say it's a good team?
I was saying some stuff to you before, John, and I'll repeat it here now that we finally hit record. It's just like, I'm done with the idea, or any of these people on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever it may be. I'm just done with the people who just refuse to see what this team truly is. And that is just, it's a good baseball team. Like, I understand what Ryan was saying before and the pessimism because we were in first last year and things fell apart, but we've said it multiple times on this show as well. That team, everyone believed that the shoe would drop because you saw the players that were being trotted out there. And yes, we got behind the bench mob and all, and Billy McKinney and all these cast of characters that we got behind, and we were excited. Things, they were winning games, but it never truly got rolling because it could never really hit that, third, fourth, fifth gear. Whereas this team, I think, has been rolling in like fourth gear, and you kind of see where they are now in that gear. And it's like, we haven't even been fully healthy to this point. So if we get to that point, and you mix that in with a potential run and, dominating even more, you're dominating some more teams. But yeah, I don't understand why Mets fans refuse to shade more towards the optimism, because again, I am someone that used to be extremely pessimistic, or just, I called myself a realist, because the Wilpons were never able to really get you where you wanted to go. So once we shedded that, I said, this is a new me. And I feel like that's the way Mets fans should be. This is a new you. This is a new team. We have an unbelievable lineup. We have, in my opinion, the best 3-4 in baseball when it comes to, the middle of a lineup right now in terms of stats. And I have plenty of those, which I'll share in a little bit. So it's like, I don't get why people refuse to jump on board, but it's their loss.
I think it is. And, Ryan, I'll bounce it back to you. When I was preparing for this show, I said, you know what? I'm just going to randomly pull one lineup from last year when the Mets were still doing well. And this is a lineup from May 29th of last year. Mets were doing well. Okay. Mets were, this first place team by default. And I'm just going to read off the lineup real quick. Jonathan Villar, Francisco Lindor, James McCann, Dom Smith, Tomas Nido, Billy McKinney, Jose Peraza, Cameron Maybin. Oh. I mean, this is a lineup that had James McCann playing first base, Tomas Nido batting fifth, Dom Smith, who hasn't hit a home run, I think, since this game on May 29th of last year in the major leagues, batting cleanup. I mean, if you can't look at what's different from this team to last year's team, I don't know. I don't know what else Met fans could possibly want. And we've talked about it on this show with Lori Rubinson of WFAN. If you can't enjoy this, what can you enjoy? Yeah. And nobody's crowning them World Series champions, but what can you, if you can't enjoy this right now, they're the best team in the National League. Yeah. What are you ever going to enjoy in your Mets fandom?
I think you just put it into context there with that lineup. There was a large portion of the season last year where Jonathan Villar was the Mets' second best player. I mean, come on. Jonathan Villar, a guy that I hated the signing. I got crushed for it because I had mocked the signing, and I'd said he's just a guy that basically gets stats on bad teams. Mm-hmm. And my listeners made me buy a Jonathan Villar jersey because he made me eat my words. But it was a completely different ball club. And you're looking at Jeff McNeil, the difference from last year to this year. Right. Louis Guillorme, what he's done this season. Brandon Nemo's healthy. Starling Marte. I mean, it's not even close to compare these two teams. And I mean, the bottom line is this team's a wagon. I mean, let's all hop on and enjoy the ride because it's going to be a fun summer.
And that's the thing too. And I've, in the last couple weeks, Brandon Tierney on WFAN has been the target of my ire a bit, mm-hmm. because I find it strange that people look at this team and say, is it consistent? Can they do it? Can they keep it up this way? Because for a little while, they weren't hitting with a lot of pop. And I guess they still aren't compared to some of the other teams in the league. But I don't know. I think it's strange how you have Yankee fans like Brandon Tierney, who for 8 years, 10 years have been like, the Yankees are too long ball dominant. That's their problem. It's not sustainable. Then you have the Mets coming out here doing it with base hits, keeping the line moving, singles, doubles, the here and there home run that's a big, in a big spot. And all of a sudden, that's not sustainable. So I know people are taking things like expected batting average and batting average on balls in play and exit velocity, average team exit velocity, things like that. When you look at this lineup, Ryan, do you think that this is something that they can maintain?
Yeah, I actually just did a deep dive on JD Davis, and it was just to kind of poke some holes in the expected metrics and the way that we evaluate this stuff. And I'm in the numbers more than anyone. So I get how we can get swept away by these narratives. But if you look at JD Davis and his expected metrics, the reason why they love him so much is he hits everything 96 miles per hour. But he hits it a lot of times, line drives right at outfielders' feet. If you're lucky, other times they get caught. Pete Alonso's expected stats get driven down because there's a lot of situations this year where they have the second base hole wide open and he hits a ground ball with an exit velocity of 70 miles per hour that has an expected batting average of 0.50, right? That's him taking advantage of what the defense is giving him to put runs on the board. And so it might say, okay, well, Pete's not hitting the ball as hard. He's due for a regression. You got to look past the numbers a little bit. And that's why sometimes the traditional stats are the ones you should look at. And you look at RBIs. This guy is one of the best run producers, if not the best run producer, certainly in the National League, and outside of Jose Ramirez, the best run producer in baseball. So I think sometimes we get carried away a bit with the numbers. And there's nothing that I've seen this year that tells me that this offense is not sustainable moving forward.
I mean, that sums it up perfectly. And I know he picked JD Davis, who is a favorite of mine to dump on. And I'll circle back to that in a minute, Ryan. But because I just think JD Davis is on this baseball team to hit lefties, hit fastballs, and hit for power. And I've never seen JD Davis do any of those three things with any sustainability. And I know he hits the ball 95 plus miles an hour on every at bat, but I don't know, man. I also watch him go up there most of the time with two runners on against a lefty that throws 92 miles an hour, and he whiffs on three fastballs right down the middle. And you're nodding with me. I don't know if you agree with me. No. I don't really like JD Davis.
No, I don't look. I've had my show now. This is my fourth season. I have been trying to trade JD Davis for 4 years now. I hated the move when they got him. He's statistically, I'm not even kidding. I've gone through the numbers. He is the worst defensive player in all of baseball, without a doubt. And like you said, and what my whole article is I do think that for this particular team right now, he gives them the best at bats at DH. But if this team wants to hit the next level, I do believe that whether it's at the deadline, whether it's Mark Vientos coming up, I think you need to upgrade from that spot because, like you said, the home runs never come anymore. Outside of 2019 with the juice ball season, he doesn't hit home runs. And again, while he gives you good at bats, he's not really moving the needle like you would want from a primary DH. So we'll see what the Mets do there. I do think he's the best option at the moment, but I'm definitely not on the bandwagon of JD Davis. I've been the opposite of that for sure.
It's nice, Ibby, to finally have a guest.
You finally got someone that's with you.
Listen, man, Andrew Flecker disagreed with me. Lori Rubinson disagreed with me. I agree with you, Ryan. Like, look, he's the best option now, especially from the right side. The Mets don't have a right-handed bat off the bench that offers pop, and it's JD Davis. But I agree, they're eventually going to have to go somewhere else and try to get to the next level. So I guess we'll use that as the segue, Ibby, because Dom Smith is back. Dom Smith went down to the minors. Look, we talked about it. He should have been sent down when he was. He should have not been sent down earlier in the season when they could have just easily cut Cano, which they did. I think they made the right choice at both times. This one is a little bit kind of fluky because Lugo goes on the paternity list, but I don't know. What do you think about Dom Smith being back here? I know he hit some home runs. He drove in some runs, but Dom Smith, even before the sleep apnea diagnosis, even before he turned things on a couple of years ago, Dom Smith always hit in AAA. Yeah. So him going down there and lighting it up does not inspire confidence for me. What do you think?
I mean, I would look at it, and we talked about it once he got sent down, and my main thing was it's one thing to be a solid contributor like he was the 1 year coming off of the bench, but I think that players need consistency and they want to get their at-bats and they want to get their work in. And I was saying back then when he got sent down that it was a good thing for him to go down. And yes, he has hit AAA before, but the idea of him getting that consistency, him allowing himself to find a groove, get comfortable, maybe, find himself again. I think it took like 2 or 3 games while he was down there. He finally hit a home run. So things were, starting to click a little bit more for him. And I'm hoping that time allowed him to get that confidence back, get that good feeling back. So now that he's back up with the team, everyone saw him in the dugout in the 9th inning the other day. Everyone was pumped up to see him back. Obviously, he's a respected and loved player, amongst all the players, which is a great thing and good for the chemistry and everything like that. But I'm hoping that time down there allows him to make better use of his starts that he'll get on this team moving forward.
But do you think it will? That's, I guess, my question. I mean, look, you're not.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard to really, think about that, in the, predicting that out. Like I'm hoping it helps.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will. Like you said, if I'm going off of what I saw early on, it doesn't really aspire too much from that sense. But I'm trying to be on the, the brighter side of things here. So I hope it kind of does change that over for him a little bit. But we'll see.
I tend to agree with you. Ryan, I'll bounce it over to you now. I mean, I like Dom Smith. I've said it on the show a million times. I like him as a player, and he seems like he's a really good dude. So I want him to succeed. I think also he did everything that you could ask of a player. He got in better shape. He learned how to play left field and became serviceable. You mentioned how bad JD Davis is defensively anywhere you put him. Dom is a plus defender at first, and I don't think he'll ever win a gold glove in the outfield, but he allowed himself to learn how to play left and right field and played it pretty competently. If you gave me the choice of do I want Dom Smith in the outfield or JD Davis, I'm taking Dom Smith every time, 100 times out of 100. All of that said, though, Ryan, I don't know. I don't know what to expect from him. I know he's got the pedigree of where he was drafted and the type of ball player he projected to be. But outside of basically 3/4 of a year, if you kind of slice up the COVID shortened season and what he did after that, outside of that, he's been an underwhelming baseball player. So I don't know what to expect. And him and JD Davis are kind of tied to the hip because as long as Pete Alonso's here, he's the first baseman, and some combination of those two guys is the DH.
Yeah, I would be. Now, I said this probably in the offseason too. So you could probably pull this exact quote from me for the last 3 years. I would be so shocked if both of those guys were back next year. And honestly, I'd be surprised if either of them was. You look at Dominic Smith, and I hope he gets his opportunity somewhere else. I think every Mets fan who's watched this guy's career loves Dom as a person. But at a certain point, you had to look at the results, and they just haven't been there, and particularly since 2021 started. And I think that it does tell a lot that it seems like Daniel Palka was supposed to get the call instead of Dom. He got sent up there first. Apparently, there was something in his medicals. He wasn't clear to play, and then they rushed Dom in. Dom didn't show up at that game until the end of it. I didn't even notice this, honestly, for my show that the next night. I didn't talk about that. I just found out about it all today. But Palka was supposed to be the call. And if you look at Palka's numbers, he was tearing the cover off the ball the last couple of weeks.
Numbers,
So that makes a lot of sense. I will say that since they made this move, it does make sense as far as the 40-man roster is concerned. And I do believe that Dom Smith will give better at bats than Nick Plummer's been giving the last couple of weeks, because after those first 2 home runs, he's gone hitless. But it's hard to really know what you're going to get from Dom. You just have to hope that there's a chip on his shoulder now and he just comes through. And we've seen it. Can we see it again? We saw it in spring training. We saw it in 2020. We saw it in 2019. Does he have a couple of good months of baseball left to really be a key contributor down the stretch?
And I think that, sorry to cut you off, John, I was just going to say, and I think that the idea of him coming in and providing something that's positive and doing something that can actually help the team is, in essence, really going to help him get off the team. Because I think if he does well, I think you're going to see him potentially in a package for a potentially another DH or a middle reliever or something along those lines. Because if he comes up and succeeds, I don't think he's going to be staying here in the long run. I think that's going to be his one-way ticket elsewhere.
Yeah, that's actually a good place to take it, Ryan. So, you mentioned you've been trying to trade JD Davis for 4 seasons. Ibby's talking now about the potential of including Dom if he performs in a deal. And you said that you'd be surprised if one or maybe both of them are still on this team next year. In the offseason, I know it's old news now, I said the 4 biggest catalysts of change for this team is from an offensive perspective were Michael Conforto, Dom Smith, JD Davis, and Jeff McNeil. And I always thought Conforto and JD Davis were the easiest to walk away from. Conforto, because you don't have to give him a contract. You can let him be somebody else's problem or solution, whatever it is. And with JD Davis, we've already talked about it. I just think he was the kind of guy that you can trade to a bad team that can go there and DH or play a little bit of first base. He doesn't make a lot of money, and it was an easy solution. The other two guys, most notably McNeil, I thought you have to keep McNeil because everything he has shown at the major league level, except for last year, was that he's a great hitter. And so you don't want to give up on him after one bad year. With Dom, I was willing to say, okay, he's got the pedigree. Let's give him one more go. So I would have let Conforto walk, which they did. I also would have traded JD Davis. I would have kept the other two. But now here we are. The Mets are Conforto-less. Jeff McNeil is back to being Jeff McNeil, and the other two guys are still on the team. Do you see a scenario where JD Davis and or Dom Smith are off this team as soon as the trade deadline? Do you think that's possible?
So it's really interesting because in a certain sense, I actually agree with a lot of what you just said. Those were kind of my same thoughts heading into the year. I felt pretty similarly about all four of those players. I just look right now and I think JD Davis is blocking Mark Vientos. But is Mark Vientos going to be able to contribute to the team this year? You're talking about calling up a rookie who strikes out a lot in a pressure-packed situation where he's not going to get regular playing time. It's not, even as JD Davis has started to get more at-bats, he's not in the lineup every single day. So that's the tricky part here. And I wonder if the Mets are better off holding on to JD Davis and Dominic Smith at the deadline this year, just simply for depth, because I don't think either of them moves the needle in any trade. Now, with that said, I see Dom more likely to be moved because JD has at least carved out a role. And so I could see a scenario where, let's just say the Mets were to make a trade for Wilson Contreras with the Cubs, where Dom could be a throw-in, where you're doing Dom a solid, sending him to somewhere where he'd get some playing time because you realize that he's not going to contribute much to your team. And you could even look at Daniel Polka and say, all right, we got someone that could do some similar stuff for the remainder of this season. So you kind of give Dom an opportunity to go elsewhere. You sweeten the package a little bit for a team like the Cubs that can throw a name in the mix for their lineup for their fans that'd be losing a star player. That's the type of way I could see one of those guys being dealt. But considering the role that JD has right now, I just don't see them moving him because I don't really think there's any team, despite his success, that's going to give you anything of significance. Like, I don't even think JD Davis alone gets you the reliever you might want. And then 1-for-1, you're still throwing in a prospect. So if that's the case, you might as well keep JD, hopefully puts up some pretty decent numbers, and then maybe you can move him in the offseason and kind of leave the door open for Vientos next year, assuming he's not dealt at the deadline.
Right. Yeah, a lot of that makes sense because I tend to agree with you that I think that despite Dom's lack of power, despite Dom's down year pretty much offensively across the board, I think he has more value to another team than JD Davis because Dom can play defense. And JD Davis, like you said, might be the worst defensive player in all of baseball. And I know that's not what teams are going to go out and try to acquire, a guy that can play first base. But I also think that everything you mentioned about JD Davis with the exit velocity and all the, it sounds good, but he's not really producing that much more than Dom, all things considered. So I don't think there's a team chomping at the bit saying, wow, I'd really love to get my hands on JD Davis. I think a team might look at Dom Smith and say, we can have him be our first baseman for the next 2 years while we rebuild, or we could fix him potentially, or we can get more out of him by making him this type of player instead of this, whatever it might be. Ibby, he brings up a good point, which is the Mets catching situation. He said Wilson Contreras of the Cubs. Look, I think the Mets are probably going to get a bat and a middle relief pitcher come the trade deadline.
Agreed.
But catcher is something that everybody knows. We got Francisco Alvarez. He's a stud. He's probably going to be up, I would imagine, sometime next year. But he ain't ready this year. For everything he said about Vientos, it's doubly true because Francisco Alvarez would have to come up here and catch Degrom and Scherzer and Edwin Diaz. And, he might not be up to speed there. So would you go and acquire a stopgap catcher with, I know McCann's coming back probably in the next week or so, but would you go out and get a guy like Contreras?
I think it's really all dependent on how the market really sets itself around the deadline. And what I mean is if there's another position or another type of bat that you can go out and get that kind of helps your lineup where it's okay that you have McCann or Nito behind the plate, I think that's okay. But if Wilson Contreras proves to be that type of bat that really is going to, bring this lineup home, if you will, give us another right-handed bat with some pop, then I don't have a problem with it. And we've seen already that, money is not an issue in terms of, the overall contract that McCann has. If we're going to go out and acquire someone and, we're going to have a guy who's making 40 million sitting on the bench, it's like, it's not that big of a deal because, Stevie Cohen has proven to us that that's not a problem. Like, I'm going to get the best guys to play for us and we're going to try to win. So, in that case, I don't think that it's completely out of the question. I am curious as to what the price tag on Wilson Contreras would be. And really, it comes down to, we're not really 100% sure on what is truly going to be available from the Mets side and what they're willing to, part ways with. Like, we all look at it and we say, look, Francisco Alvarez is not going anywhere. He's the one guy that we know for sure is not going anywhere. But is this team, I'm going to say maybe it's dependent on the player. I think a lot of fans automatically say that they'd be more willing to include a Vientos or even a Ronnie Mauricio in a deal potentially. They don't want to give up Alvarez. They don't want to give up Beatty. We really don't have much pitching to give up. So I think it really comes down to what type of player are they willing to give up and what is the price tag on a player like Wilson Contreras. But in terms of acquiring a catcher of that ilk to help this team, I could definitely see them potentially doing that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan, you were the one who brought up his name, and I know it's not something that is breaking news, right? He's been mentioned, linked to the Mets. They don't have a great catching situation right now. Where would you rank him in terms of, like, I don't want to say dream scenario, but taking Ibby's caveat off the table, which is fair. Look, whoever's available is available. You're going to try to make the best deal you can for your team. Where would you rank acquiring a catcher in terms of importance? Let's just say if the option was catcher or somebody who's strictly a DH.
I'll say that I love the idea of a Wilson Contreras trade right when James McCann went down. I thought if the Mets were being really aggressive, they could jump on it. And I think if they had stumbled after the injury, they might have done that. But they kept on winning with Mazika and Nito, and it didn't matter. And so because of that, I don't necessarily know how much I'm willing to give up for a Contreras rental. And the one thing I would say is any Contreras trade, I'd want someone like David Robertson coming back. So if you gave up a Ronnie Mauricio, you could get your reliever in that same trade. When it comes to Contreras, I think that he would immediately be the best DH option on the Mets too. So in that sense, it serves, multiple purposes because you could have a lineup where, if the lefty's on the mound, you could have McCann behind the plate and Contreras at DH. And he also mashes lefties, which was a problem for the Mets early in the season, but they've kind of corrected it. So considering how they're playing right now, though, and the fact that they managed without McCann and they're about to get him back, I would not be surprised at all if they just went straight defense with catcher and hope you get a little bit more out of McCann than you've been getting, but just stick with McCann and Nito. And I do think that that's really important with this staff. And so maybe the direction is looking at someone who brings a little bit of positional flexibility and can be the DH as well. So I don't know what's out there, but I really, when you look at the way this lineup has performed, I wouldn't even be mad at all if they didn't even address it, to be completely honest with you.
Okay, that's fair. I guess, look, this lineup has been excellent. And so it's hard for me to say, oh, they need a bat, they need a bat, they need a bat. I just felt going into the season that they needed one more bat. Somebody of significance that could protect Alonso. And I know that they've moved people around in that fifth spot. And I like it best if he's healthy with Jeff McNeil there. Because look, he hits lefties, he hits righties. He's hitting like 325 or 327 right now. And I know he doesn't have the pop that an Escobar has, but I just think that he's the kind of guy that you want in that spot. And I like Buck Showalter. I like Billy Epler. I like what they've done. I like the team they've built. I like how they get everybody involved. I think their lineup is creative each and every single day. And I see the point. And I'm not one of those guys who's like, you got to run out the same 9 guys and everybody's got to play 162 games. I think that's absurd. But I will say that I think the one issue I've had over the first bit of the season is that Jeff McNeil kind of gets wasted batting 8th. I mean, having a guy that hits 320 batting 8th seems absurd to me. Your thoughts on that, Ryan?
The one thing that's crazy is I don't know the numbers now, but at one point in the season, his numbers in the 8-hole were insane. I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know why he was producing so well in the 8-hole, but he was. I agree, though. I think that the way this roster is constructed, he is the best option to put behind Pete Alonso, because if I'm an opposing team and first base is open, but I walk Pete and now suddenly I got a lot of traffic and Jeff McNeil, who finds every hole, can just get a base hit and drive in too. That's not a situation I want to be in, because suddenly you got 2 runs scored and you got Alonso standing on third and Jeff McNeil's on first. And, a rally has just completely broken out. So I think he's the best option. And I will agree that maybe there is something down the pike that could be a better protection for Alonso. For now, though, it's McNeil. And I really think that they could go into the postseason with their 1 through 5 being, Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, McNeil. And it's a good enough lineup for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Ibby, you said earlier that you think, the Mets have potentially, certainly in the NL, the best 3 and 4 with Lindor and Alonso. And the way that they've been driving in runs is not only a testament to what they've been willing to do, shortening up, going the other way, all that stuff, but it's also a testament to how good Nimmo and Marte have been at the top of the lineup. So I guess I'll just bounce the same thing back to you, because it's not something you and I have talked about before, but the thought of Jeff McNeil being higher in the lineup, being in an RBI situation. And like Ryan said earlier with Pete Alonso, like, it doesn't matter how you get the hits. It's just that you get them. It doesn't matter if it's got a 70-mile-an-hour exit velocity. If you slap it the other way and you drive in 2 runs, you drove in 2 runs. I don't care. I don't care how they come.
Before I answer the question on McNeil, I just wanted to put it out there. Obviously, shout out again to Matthew Brownstein, who always puts out the great stats. Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, and Alonso have combined for 168 of the team's 348 runs, which accounts for 48.2% of the team's runs this year. So, yes, the top of the lineup is thriving. And I'm just going to answer it by saying what Ryan said, I think, really paints the picture of why I agree with it. And that is, if there is a guy on second, or if there's a guy on third, whatever, they're trying to set up a double play, whatever it may be, and they don't want to pitch to Alonso, they walk him. And it's just like, you got to deal with a guy who, no matter what, is going to put the ball in play. And we've seen with this offense so far this year, which isn't hitting a lot of home runs, they're putting the ball in play. They're making other teams make plays. They're finding holes. Jeff McNeil is the guy where I think a lot of Mets fans see him up. It's almost like they're borderline expecting a hit because of the way he's been playing. So when you have that, type of bat behind Pete, it's like you said, there's always going to be traffic on the bases then. So it's like you're going to create something, you get something kickstarted, or you can continue to really put your foot on the throat of the opposing team. So yeah, I love the idea of him behind there. And I'm going to throw this to Ryan real quick, because I constantly hear Gary asking this question during the broadcast, but why do teams continue to play the shift the way that they do on McNeil, who has shown clearly in his at-bats that he's going to take what you give him and he's going to either bunt it or he's going to slap it the other way. He's going to get a single. He's going to turn to a double, whatever it may be. Why do they continue to play him like this as opposed to playing him more traditionally and straight up?
It makes no sense. I would say the exact same thing.
I don't get it.
I would say the exact same thing with Pete Alonso and RBI situations. Have you been watching the tape? And I would say the same thing about Mark Canha. And I think both Canha and McNeil are hitting over 380 against the shift this year. So
yeah,
that just shows you, how lethal they've been in those spots. And I love watching McNeil hit like this again instead of what we saw last year. Yes. Seeing him get back to the I don't care how hard I'm hitting it. The way he scans the field before he stepped into the box. How are you as a defensive team not processing that he's staring right at this ocean that you're leaving him, and he's obviously going to hit it there? It makes. Yeah. And when has McNeil been this big pull guy that you think you should put 3 infielders on that side of it? It makes no sense to me. But I really hope that they're not listening and they keep doing it.
It's true, man. It defies all logic. And I know he got a little pull happy last year, and I know that was part of his problem. And in one of the broadcasts, wasn't this past week, maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I know somebody mentioned, well, when McNeil hits it on the ground, he does have a tendency, like when he's not, like, I guess, like when he makes a mistake, he's pulling it. And so, it's easier for you to make an out on that. But he rolls over on the ball to the shortstop hole, hits it 30 miles an hour, and there's nobody there. So, like, it is a wild thought process of, like, I guess with McNeil, he might beat the shift no matter what the shift is because he's got that good a bat control. But it is wild to see these teams treating him like he's a dead pull power hitter when he is anything but. And they're probably going to shift him till he, he's going to finish the year batting like 330 because they just won't stop shifting on him. Let's head into the break. We got a lot more stuff to talk about with Tyler McGill, with Jacob Degrom, Max Scherzer on the mound tonight as we record this podcast up in Binghamton. So we got so much to get into. This is John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, with our guest, Ryan Finkelstein of the Locked On Mets podcast. We will be right back. Yo, welcome back into Till Mets Do Us Part here on the Chop Sports Network. John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez, our guest this week. It's a little bit of a collab between Till Mets Do Us Part and the Locked On Mets podcast. We've got Ryan Finkelstein. Thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it. And look, we talked a lot about the offense in the first half, and now we have to dive into the pitching side. We have to talk about it because Max Scherzer is on the mound. Looks like he's going to have one rehab start and then be back. You've got the Rumble Ponies hat working today. Hopefully that is some good karma. Then we've got Jacob Degrom. Looks like he's not that far away from starting a rehab assignment. And then we've got Tyler McGill, a little bit on the bad side. He's out for basically another month of no throwing. Let's start with the ultimate good. Max Scherzer on the mound. This guy, Ryan, he's a maniac. I don't understand how he gets
Psychopath.
hurt. Even when he got hurt, he was like, I'm hurt. You got to take me out. And then they're like, oh, how long is he going to be out? He's like, I'm good. I'm coming back. This guy's like a machine. He's built different. He really is.
It's insane because at the time when he first went down, I was like, all right, he'll probably be the last one back, between McGill, DeGrom, and I just imagined they would slow play it, but he's already throwing, and then you're like, is he really throwing bullpens already? And now he's in a live game. And assuming all goes well, he could be back as soon as Sunday. So it's crazy how at his age he beat the original injury timetable. And I think a couple things have really changed from this team this year. I think if there was three main, or maybe four additions that really kind of jump out to me, it's Buck Showalter managing the team, it's Max Scherzer's leadership, and then it's the other vets they brought into the Escobar, Canna, Marte signings. I think that has just transformed the intention this ball club has when they go into every game, the way they're playing through 27 outs. And I think Scherzer has been as big a part of that from a leadership perspective. When you get him back out there every fifth day, he's just a bulldog. And it still is one of those things where every single time I think he steps on the mound or they get a shot of Scherzer in the dugout wearing a Mets hat, it's a pinch me moment as a fan. He was the number one, nightmare, the terror in any Mets fan's heart. Anytime you knew that you were going against Scherzer in a Nationals uniform, it was basically going to be a loss. He just owned the Mets, and now he's on the Mets. So it's just been a crazy turn of events. And I can't wait to see him pitch again.
It is really, Ibby, it is a pinch me moment. Even now, he's pitched in games. He's had some great starts, and it doesn't matter. I mean, you look out there and that's, I know we talked about it at the top, but for Mets fans that are like, this is the same team. This is it's like, when have the Mets ever gone out, addressed a guy that they wanted, locked onto that guy that other people wanted, gave him the most money, got the guy when everybody thought they wouldn't? I mean, we talked about it in the offseason. That was the biggest telltale sign. I know they had to pay dividends on the field, but here he is, providing the leadership, providing, pitching his ass off, pitching like he's younger than he is. And I know he's on the shelf right now, but like Ryan said, he might be back on Sunday.
Yeah, I posted this in our Facebook group the other day. It's like, once we got word that he might be potentially on the mound on Sunday against the Marlins, I was like, I can't wait to see this psychopath back on the bump, because it really is. It like what Ryan said before, it changed everything, because when you get a player of that caliber, it shows what your intentions are as a franchise and what you're truly trying to do. And everything he provided to this team up until he got hurt, it made every time he was on the mound, like it was always something special. Like, obviously we had that with Jake as well, and obviously we haven't got a chance to have that this year with him just yet, but just having a player like that and the leadership that he brings, like Ryan said, it transforms this team. And it really is a pinch me moment, because I still laugh at every time. I think Green Man always says it, or a lot of people on Mets Twitter is like, they'll say the day and then they'll tweet out like, just so you remember, Max Scherzer is a New York Met. And it's true. It's just like, you can't believe that he truly is here. And of course you have haters say, well, he's 37, whatever. He's like, I don't care. This guy goes out there, pitches his ass off like he's still the ace when he was 10 years ago. It doesn't matter. So I'm extremely excited. I hope he does well tonight for AA in Binghamton. And I hope that we see him back on the mound on Sunday. I really do.
Yeah, me too. I mean, obviously. And part of that is, look, Ryan, we've gotten great contributions from Trevor Williams and from David Peterson, probably better than you could expect in most cases. And I think it's another case where some Mets Twitter is unfair. They want everybody to be electric. Trevor Williams is not going to be electric. He's not an ace. He is who he is. If he comes out there and he gives you 5 1/3 innings of 1-run ball, you take that and you run with it to the bank. You need that. He's not Max Scherzer. He's not even Chris Bassett. He's not this guy who's going to give you electric stuff time in and time out. But a guy who is Jacob Degrom. And Jacob Degrom is a little bit behind Max Scherzer. He's coming back. Maybe, I don't know. What do you think? At this point, it's going to be several rehab starts because he's got to go through a whole spring training, essentially. So when we get Degrom back, what is your first throw the numbers out just as a fan, having Jacob Degrom pitch, let's say a day after Max Scherzer, what is that going to be like for you?
It's insane. It is absolutely insane to picture and to think about. And I think we've gotten to a point, Jacob Degrom, where unfortunately there's been so many setbacks that it's until he's on a big league mound and he makes it through 6 innings or whatever it is and gets up to 80, 90 pitches. I think that fans are going to always be nervous right now until he's kind of proven that health. But I mean, you can dream about the potential. One of the things that I said for a long time is the greatest sin in baseball is that Jacob Degrom hasn't thrown a pitch in October since 2015. Yeah. We all want to see it again. Yeah. And I, in some respects, I do wonder if, and again, this is kind of pie in the sky, but maybe this injury is a little bit of a blessing in disguise because it could get to a point where Degrom is really at his prime powers right when you want him to be heading into September. The innings are going to be really under control now. He's probably only going to pitch in the second half. I think they'd be lucky to get him back before the break still because, like you said, they're going to be really cautious and take their time with his rehab. But, yeah, if you get him back and you get whatever it is, 12, 13 starts down the stretch, and you get him looking like prime Jacob Degrom heading into the playoffs, and you can go into a series knowing that in a 7-game series you're going to get multiple starts from Max Scherzer and Jacob Degrom when you only need to win 4 games, you got to feel pretty good.
Yeah, you have to. How could you not? And that brings me to the third guy I mentioned, who obviously is now a ways away, and hopefully everything works out with Tyler McGill. But Ibby, if everybody is healthy, which I know is a huge thing in sports, in baseball, and especially in a starting rotation. But if everyone is healthy at some point this season, whether it's August, September, October, whatever it is, you have a situation where you could potentially have Degrom, Scherzer, Bassett, Carrasco, and Walker in the rotation. And then what a weapon Tyler McGill could be in the bullpen. And I know that the Mets right now are a little short in the bullpen. I know they're a little up and down in the bullpen, everybody outside of Edwin Diaz. But, man, what a weapon he could be if he finds his way back this season.
Yeah, it truly would be. And I think that, like you said, if everyone gets healthy with a lot of the questions that we had in the beginning of the season and really during the offseason, talking about the potential health, because we were curious about Cookie Carrasco and what he was going to be able to provide, and we were curious on Taijuan Walker coming off of the innings that he had pitched. He seemed like he tired out last year. Him going forward with that, and then really relying on that depth that we thought we were going to be relying on really stepped up to this point. But if we can at some point, have those guys revert back to where they were supposed to be, then yes, the idea of having, the likes of a McGill in the pen and Peterson being stretched out at AAA and things like that, and Trevor Williams coming out as a long man potentially, the idea of that is great. But like Ryan was saying, until I see Jacob Degrom get on that mound, until I see these guys get back to being healthy, it's hard to really think about that. But when it comes to McGill, I was really dejected, when he threw that pitch, and then he's like, no, I got to go. And then he got pulled, and it ended up being a right shoulder strain. So yeah, a month away before they'd reevaluate and seeing what's going to happen with him. But yeah, hopefully, at some point, maybe you can see him again in maybe around August is my guess, late July, August, you might see him again. But yeah, the idea of the staff, and it's crazy that I keep on saying the idea of things, as this team has the best record in the NL. And I'm still saying the idea of certain things happening, because not everything has really clicked to this point. And that's insane because, like I said, they're tops in a lot of categories. But yeah, it hopefully in time we will see everything click and we will see all these guys back together. But until then, we just got to keep on fighting.
Well, and that's the thing, Ryan. And I think that's the story of the episode so far, has just kind of been all of these tangible, real reasons why, again, nobody's crowning anybody anything.
Nope.
Nobody's saying you got to go out there and talk shit in the streets. Nobody's saying any of that. I just think that people need to realize why this is different. I mean, we're talking about these scenarios that may never happen. We're talking about, Degrom and Scherzer being fully healthy, back in the rotation. All 5 guys are there. We're going to bump McGill to the pen. He's going to give us a lift. We're talking about all these things, these what ifs, these dream scenarios, when meanwhile, here they are, best team in the National League by a pretty good margin. And so when you find yourself in that situation, it's just, and again, they've been short in the bullpen. They haven't been their best yet. And I think that's the reason why, because in the past, the Mets have always been, well, if everything breaks right, we'll be good. That was like the Wilpon mantra. If this guy's healthy,
PTSD.
If David Wright comes back, if this guy comes, it was always that. If we can get innings out of Michael Wacha, if Rick Porcello can regain form, like these are the things. But now we're saying if this, to add to the best team in the National League. So that's, for me, that's the biggest difference, is that they are where they are without these what ifs.
And excuse me, they also could be even better in years to come. That's the thing you could start to dream about a little bit, is this is just the beginning of building a foundation that could carry over. And I look at Tyler McGill in particular, and I always look at a season and it's trying to manage your way through a marathon. If Tyler McGill doesn't throw another pitch this season, the contributions he gave this team, basically being Degrom in April, is all you really needed. And I look towards the future and I say, well, who knows what the long-term rotation is going to look like with Degrom and Scherzer and Carrasco and Bassett, all these guys in their 30s. But I look at David Peterson and Tyler McGill, I'm like, all right, they got a couple of guys now in the back end of their rotation that could be answers for years to come. And if McGill's not a huge weapon this year out of the bullpen, which I do think is a distinct possibility, he could be a giant part of the 2023 Mets. So I think this is just year one and what's going to be an exciting run here. And I think we kind of throw out 2021 and say that was the transition from the worst run organization in baseball to one that's now becoming one of the better run organizations.
Yeah, 100%. Ibby and I have talked about that so much on this show, and it's kind of old news to rehash it now, but it's true for anybody who's just picking up this podcast and listening for the first time because you're on it and they're your listeners or whatever the case may be. You can't, I know it's cliche, but Rome was not built in a day. It wasn't just Steve Cohen shows up, snaps his fingers, fixes everything. God knows he tried. He went out, he got Lindor. He gave him the big extension. They made some moves. They tried to big game hunt for people in the front office. They fell a little bit short, but the way it worked out pretty great because I honestly think for the first time in a while with Billy Epler and the people that he's installed underneath him, we have a competently run organization top to bottom. And it always starts with the owner. It's Cohen. It's down to the front office with Epler and everybody else. I'm even going to include Sandy Alderson because he's a good baseball man and he's in there somewhere. And then right down to Buck Showalter. And how could you not love what you're seeing from Buck Showalter and Cora and Hefner and Chavez? I mean, they finally, like you said, they're on their way to being one of the best run organizations. It's hard to say that only, less than half a year into the run, but they're there. When you look at the way teams like the Dodgers and the Rays and the Cardinals and the Yankees operate, the Mets are right there with all of them now, and it's amazing to see. It really is. I don't even know what to make of it, to be honestly.
It's truly a breath of fresh air, and everything that you just broke down, John, reverts back to what we were talking about in the first half of my confusion as to why anybody is not having fun with this team or is not being happy because of everything that, for me, the only thing I ever truly wanted from this freaking team, outside of a championship, obviously, is the idea of competency. I just wanted things to make sense. I wanted aggressiveness. I wanted to go out and big game hunt. I wanted to do these things. I wanted to think that my team can go out and get a certain player, or that they're going to be smart when it comes to bringing along a younger player. anything along those lines. That's the thing that I wanted the most, because it showed that my team wasn't a joke, which it was for the longest time. And now that I'm seeing these things and I see a team that's going to have, flush full of talent when it comes to the draft that's coming up in a couple of weeks, and how they're going to attack those things, knowing that there are people in place that are going to make the proper calls, and the aggressiveness that can come along at the deadline. It's like, this is what I wanted. And like you said, Rome wasn't built in a day, so building those things up from the bottom take time. But when you have the money to now spend and you're putting the product on the field at the same exact time, it's like, what Mets fans, Mets Twitter, anybody, I don't know what else you possibly want, what you're looking for. This is the time to finally accept confidence, boost that self-esteem, be happy. Know that every time you turn on that game, that your team has a shot to win, because that's the way I feel now. There used to be times where I would turn on a game and it would be Mets versus Dodgers and Clayton Kershaw's on the mound. And I'm saying, Jesus Christ, there's no hit. There's no hit. There is no hit atmosphere, in the air right now, because our team was so terrible. And now I can go out and I can say that my team can go out and beat the Dodgers. They can beat the Padres. They can beat the Yankees. They can beat the Red Sox, like whoever it may be. And that's the way Mets fans should feel, accepting confidence. But John, I think you put it best a couple weeks back, saying something along the lines of that it's a lot easier to something with success and failure. It's a lot more. It's a lot easier to be afraid of success and things like that. So, accept it. You have a good baseball team. Enjoy the ride. Let's freaking go. Come on. I mean, come on.
That was some rally cry, man. I agree with you, though. I do. All right, before we get out of here, we got about 10 more minutes to play with.
Yeah.
Ryan, I want to bounce it over to you for keep it in on the pitching side, talking about the relief pitching, talking about the bullpen. Look, Edwin Diaz has been absolutely lights out this year. His slider's been one of the best pitches in all of baseball. It's kind of been back to the form that it was a few years ago with the Mariners and all that stuff. What do you? I don't want to bias. What do you think about Edwin Diaz? I'll just ask you that point blank.
I think Edwin Diaz has long been one of the most disgusting relievers in baseball, and he finally has his confidence back this year. I think that's the difference.
Yes.
He's put up pretty decent seasons. If you look at 2020, he was pretty much as dominant as he's been this year, but it was 2020, so no one really remembers that. 2021, he was solid last season, really nothing to complain about, but he wasn't what he was the last year in Seattle before the Mets traded for him, and he's that this year, if not even better. I mean, the guy's striking out over 17 batters per 9. About 50% of the batters he faces this year, he strikes out. And I think what's different this season, I've done some deep dives into his stuff, and he's throwing the slider more, but he's also getting strike one a lot more. And so what happens there is as soon as he gets strike one, he's just going to play outside of the zone and you're going to get yourself out. And that's what the numbers tell us. And that's what the eye test tells us. And that's why he's racking up strikeouts. If you look at the Mets bullpen right now, I have complete trust in Edwin Diaz. And then Adam Ottavino and Drew Smith, you're kind of getting there. Seth Lugo has his moments, and then there's other times where he doesn't. I think that they have enough collective talent, but they're one arm away. They need one more guy that can step in for Edwin Diaz and close out a ball game. Let's just say you want to go to Edwin Diaz in the 7th because you're in a playoff series against the Dodgers and there's runners on. You got that top of the lineup coming up.
Yeah.
You want Buck Showalter to be able to get the best strikeout pitcher in baseball and get out of that jam and still have someone in the 9th that can close the game for you. So I think that really is the one thing at this deadline that this team absolutely needs.
Ryan, I totally agree.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I just want to continue that point. Do you? I've been having conversations with fellow Mets fans at work and stuff like that, just talking about the idea of the bullpen and going out and finding someone. But I constantly ask the same question. And if you have someone, please say them. Like who do you think can be that person? Who is out there outside of the pipe dream of a Josh Hader, which I know is not going to happen, but who really is that person that could be attained at this deadline potentially to make that big difference and who could close out a game if you were to use Edwin Diaz in, say, the 7th inning in a big spot?
The name that I've looked at a bunch just based on cost of acquisition has been David Robertson because his numbers have been really good. He has a ton of experience. He's not going to get phased by the moment at all. Yeah. He's pitched in New York for a long time with the Yankees. So I like him as an option. If they wanted to go lefty and they were willing to give up a little bit more of a prospect, capital there, maybe look at Andrew Chafin because what do the Tigers need with him at this point, a guy the Mets maybe could have just signed in the offseason.
Right.
He would make a lot of sense. I don't know what else is out there. Like you hear a name like David Bednar from the Pirates, but he's got so much control. I don't think you want to, as much as Diaz is working at now, I generally don't like trading hefty prospect packages for a reliever. So They got to kind of figure out what to do there. And you know what? You did mention it earlier, and it is kind of worth exploring. The idea that McGill could potentially be that guy is still on the table because his stuff is so great. That is an option. They also have a couple of guys that maybe you could see in the minor leagues who throw really hard that are up in AAA, but I just don't know if they're going to translate that quickly.
Yeah, I think with the arms in AAA, it's kind of back to the Vientos conversation of, do you want to put a rookie in that spot? You know, even if the young players got better stuff or better potential, you know, if you look at it from an offensive side, like, yeah, I'd love to see Mark Vientos here rather than give up a prospect to go get Josh Bell to be our DH, but I trust Josh Bell in the spot more so than calling up a kid who strikes out a lot, putting him in a pressure cooker situation. And I feel the same way on the other side of things. Like, yeah, David Robertson's best baseball is probably behind him in terms of going forward. He's having a really good year, but you know, he's the guy that I would trust to close out the game. Another name that comes to mind, I think we brought him up on the show a few weeks back, maybe, is Mark Malenson.
Another guy,
you know, who's closed out games.
Easily attainable type,
Yeah, a guy that you could get, that you could say, okay, he's been a closer for a long time and he's not going to be fazed by the moment. Because, you know, Ryan, to your point, when Buck brought in Diaz to pitch to Turner and Freeman, the whole meat of the Dodger lineup, I know the Mets won that game, so it became moot. But that was the absolute right move. Seth Lugo failed in the spot. It wasn't the wrong move to bring in Diaz. It wasn't the wrong thought process. He did the exact right thing. And I said it on this show. He did something that, and I hate to evoke the guy's name again, that Mickey Callaway said he was going to do and never actually did. He said, we're going to pitch the best people in the best spots, and we're going to rethink the bullpen and how it works. And he never did it. And yet here's Buck Showalter, an old school manager, coming up and saying, I know, I need Diaz to blow through this part of the lineup. That's what I need. And so they need somebody more reliable, to your point, than Seth Lugo. Maybe Drew Smith is that guy, but I don't think he is yet. Like, I think you need to see more out of Smith. I don't think Ottavino throws enough strikes. That worries me. Holderman looks good, but now he's hurt. So I think they are probably one arm less than they need in the bullpen, Abby.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No. All right.
Sorry. Just the one name that I think we're all forgetting that I think could be the answer to all these problems is Trevor May. If Trevor May is the Trevor May we saw last year, he could be the solution. He can close games. And it looks like his injury is progressing to the point that I don't know when I think he's eligible to return off the 60 in early July. So I would imagine you can see a little bit of him before the deadline and get a sense of how important it is to get somebody else into that bullpen.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think I still think they're gonna go out, even if May comes back and he's proven to be healthy, and we all hope that he is, because this team is proving that they are good when it comes to juggling a lot of guys and utilizing the depth that they have. But yeah, I still think that I don't know who it is. I'll probably comb through some more teams tonight because I'm curious, but I think that they need just one more person in that pen. And if we're talking about the deadline, and we will, in the weeks to come, but I feel that as much as we can talk about a bat, I still think the idea of getting a legit pen arm is what this team really needs, and what I'm really focusing on as a team that could potentially be playing deep into October.
Before we get out of here, let me ask you the question, Ryan, from another perspective, because I'm a believer in, when a team is legitimately good, you have to reward that team from a front office, from an ownership perspective. The Mets are legitimately good, and I think you need to reward them by bolstering them. So regardless of what they do, the Mets are going to go out and add something at the deadline because they're going to be in a position to be able to do it. So we've talked a little bit about some of the prospects. Is there someone that you would be of the higher ends, is there someone that you would be willing to give up in the right deal? I think we can all agree Alvarez is off the table. You don't trade, a middle of the lineup catcher with that kind of ability. So him notwithstanding, whether it's Mauricio, Vientos, Beatty, is there someone that you would say, okay, in a deal for X, I'd be willing to part with one of these guys?
I think the three untouchables, it's Alvarez, it's Beatty, and it's Matt Allen, just based on the fact that they don't have that type of high upside pitcher in their system. Not to mention, I don't know how many teams are willing to trade for a guy that still hasn't thrown a pitch after the Tommy John. But
right.
You look at the two prospects that I think could really fetch you something. It's Ronnie Mauricio and Mark Vientos. And I've been back and forth all year on this. Vientos is a guy that I've spent a ton of time on my show talking about. I absolutely love his potential. I think that he's going to hit 40 home runs in the big leagues one day, but his lack of a position does make him expendable to the Mets. Ronnie Mauricio was always the guy that I would have said, just trade him, because when I looked at the stats of his profile, to me, it's very similar to Amed Rosario. Not that they're the same players, but that they can wow you with their tools. And you can look at a baseball field and say Amed Rosario is the best player on the diamond in warmups. But you get him in a game and he's striking out. It doesn't all come together. And I think he might have more value as a prospect that you trade than he'll ever have with the Mets. That being said, I took a trip this summer and I went to every single affiliate, and the prospect that popped the most to me was Ronnie Mauricio. He looked unbelievable. I mean, it might have been the one day I went, but he homered, he doubled, he lifted everything he saw. He played great defense at shortstop, and I saw the picture of what makes him a top 100 prospect. So I would not be hurt on either of those two. I think those are the two prospects that make the most sense if you need to really give up to get. It's Mauricio or Vientos, and we'll find out at the deadline which one they value more.
Yeah, that's so funny, because there's been so many people going back to the offseason, even Joe DeMayo and guests we've had on that they're like, yeah, I think Ronnie Mauricio is the odd man out. I think Mauricio, like, we like Mauricio, but like you gotta give to get, like you said, and I think he might be the guy. And then you're like, yeah, I feel like he's the guy, but then also,
I'm telling you, like he exudes star power. And I don't think he's a shortstop, honestly. I think he's probably a right fielder by the time he gets to the big leagues. And the comp that I came up with was Joey Gallo, which I know that's not the best player to some, but also you look at some of the success he's had. I think he's the type that will probably strike out 200 times, but hit 40 bombs, and his arm and everything can play up in right field. He could be a really solid defender out there. So I do think that there's a chance that he is the real deal. But there's such a wide range of outcomes there that's the type of prospect I'd move, because he just as easily can come up to the show, never figure it out, and be washed out of the league in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I do think that's the one thing, and I know we got to get out of here, and also there's a Mets game on tonight, but I think that's the one thing that a lot of Met fans, to tie the whole thing together, is that sometimes they lose sight of the one that got away all the time. Like, and everyone can't be the one that got away. You can't win every trade in a landslide. You can't fleece every team. The Jared Kelenic deal is bad because they took Cano and gave up Kelenic, regardless, because they didn't maximize the asset that they had at the time. If they just traded Kelenic for Diaz, and Diaz was this and Kelenic was that, you could say, okay, well, that's a pretty good deal. If they just traded and took on Cano to get Diaz and didn't include Kelenic, even if Kelenic was doing the same dog shit that he's doing for Seattle, for us right now, you'd be like, okay, whatever. It's maximizing the deal. And I look at it with Travis d'Arnaud from the flip side of it. People are like, oh man, d'Arnaud, the Mets let d'Arnaud go. They let d'Arnaud leave.
5 years.
d'Arnaud had 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years.
Of
he had a
being
chance.
always hurt and largely terrible at baseball. How many chances could you give him? The same thing with Conforto. They're like, oh, Conforto's going to go to Seattle and hit 40 home runs. Let him. Where was Conforto hitting 40 home runs here? When was he doing it? So I just look at, for every Daniel Murphy and Justin Turner who left here and went to another level when they weren't really given their due, or they were about to be, in the case of Murphy. You can't look at all these players of like, oh my God, like, what if Mauricio becomes a star? Like, I don't know, man, if you win a World Series, isn't it worth it? Like,
Parades over prospects.
Yeah, and like right now, I think we're going to start to see the Kellenic narrative get shifted to Pete Crow Armstrong because he's having a great season and he's rising up top 100 boards. But if the Mets had made the playoffs last year, I had written an article, back last season. Javi Baez was producing like 2015 Cespedes.
We talked about it on the show.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And you also got Trevor Williams in that deal. And now I jokingly say it's the Trevor Williams trade because what he's done for the Mets this year.
Yeah.
But I mean, they got two functional pieces, and it when you're just talking about a deadline trade that Zach Scott made, that wasn't a bad trade. Now you're going to regret it if Pete Crow Armstrong becomes a perennial all-star, but you couldn't foresee that when he had a shoulder injury and he's in, low A or whatever it was. So I think at times we get a little carried away because we now see the prospects at such a young age. We get kind of fed what they can be when they're 19, and we just think they're automatically going to be that. But there's so much that has to happen for these guys to be successful at the big league level that you just have to look at the circumstances. And as you said, this is a team that deserves to be added to. And so you're going to have to probably give a prospect that might haunt you in a couple of years. But if it means it gets you that much closer to a title and it all comes together, like you said, it's going to be worth it.
Absolutely. And I know the example everybody always references is when the Cubs traded for Aroldis Chapman. Yeah. And you know what? The Cubs won a World Series and they ended an over 100-year World Series drought. Ask the Cubs if it was worth it, giving up Gleyber. It was worth it every single time. Ryan, thank you so much, man. This has been an absolute blast. I hope that you had fun. And before we let you get out of here, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we like to give all our guests the opportunity to leave with a final thought. So if there's anything you wanted to talk about Mets-wise on this show that you didn't get a chance to, now's the time. The floor is yours.
I've been saying it since 2020. I'm wearing the shirt today. People can see it. Start Louis Guillorme every day. He's the guy. That's it.
All right. That's good enough. And also, look, I know people can find you on the Locked On Mets podcast, but drop your Twitter, drop anything that you want to promote right now too, please.
So you can follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can find Locked On Mets wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And I also do some writing for justbaseball.com. It's a great site, so check this out there as well.
Absolutely fantastic. Ibby, you got anything before we get out of here?
I'll do this just for Ryan. I'm going to say among 249 hitters with a minimum of 150 plate appearances this season, only 3 have made contact at a 90% or better clip. Number 3 on that list, Louis Guillorme, 91.1%. And he's also tops when it comes to on-base percentage as well. So shout out to Louis Guillorme. One final thing I want to say, obviously, thank you, Ryan, for coming on. And shout out to all the Mets content creators out there, because there's a lot of great news amongst a bunch of shows right now that are getting picked up, whether it's Joe DeMayo and Connor when it comes to the Mets pod, when it comes to Draft Neck Mark and everything that's going on now. The Mets Stuff podcast is part of the Mets, the official Mets podcast. Everyone out there, when it comes to Mets content, there is plenty to go out there and find. So shout out to everybody because everyone's kicking ass.
That's true. And thank you for everybody who also finds us, because it's nice because we are a newer show. We've only been out for about a year. And so, we appreciate all the support. But yeah, it's a great community. We've had other Mets podcasters and Mets content creators and Mets bloggers on this show, and it's always great conversation. I just want to leave you guys with this picture of Kyle Farnsworth.
He's jacked now.
Yeah, he looks like Schwarzenegger. This is like some wild stuff. I don't know what's going on, but this has been blowing up on Twitter over the last couple hours. I don't know what's up with Kyle Farnsworth, but
he's enjoying not getting drug tested.
I was just going to say, in retirement, they do not test for PEDs because that is not a normal human body, ladies and gentlemen. That is absolutely terrible. Anyway, this is Till Mets Do His Part. Absolute blast. Thank you once again to our guest, Ryan Finkelstein of the Locked On Mets podcast, John Sapanaro, Matt Ibby Ibanez,